Would like to welcome everybody, and I'm impressed with a huge audience, shows you how popular Jenna is. To the thesis defense of Jenna Smith. Jenna came to MSU 5 years ago from Rhodes College and joined the MONA collaboration more or less from the beginning. And just a few ground rules as usual. Jenna will give a talk about half an hour, and I would like to ask you to hold your questions till the end, unless it's something really important for the understanding. At that time, the audience is free to ask questions, so please feel free to ask questions. Then we ask the audience to leave, and the committee will continue with some of the questions, and then hopefully we're done. So, Jenna.
Thanks. So my presentation today is presenting 3 results from my doctoral thesis experiment. We did neutron decay spectroscopy on 3 isotopes, lithium-11, 10, and beryllium-12. Now we have results from all 3 of these, and I'm going to present all of them. But the experiment began and was motivated by a study of lithium-11, so that's where I'm going to begin. The chart of nuclides is a tool that nuclear scientists use to organize information about all the nuclides. Now, a nuclide is just a species of nucleus, defined by the number of neutrons and the number of protons. Here on this chart, the number of neutrons is along the x-axis, and the number of protons is along the z-axis. And the color of the square indicates the primary mode of decay of that ground state. This line of black squares right here, it's called the value of stability, and it's all the stable nuclei that we've measured. Now, the goal of nuclear structure is to be able to predict and understand the behavior of all of these nuclei. This is quite a challenge since there are approximately 3,000 known bound nuclei and approximately 4,000 more we expect to discover, as well as some unbound isotopes right along the edges. Lithium-11, with 3 protons and 8 neutrons, is located here. It's this pink square down here that you can barely see. With a neutron-to-proton ratio of 2 2/3, lithium-11 has one of the highest neutron-to-proton ratios on the chart of nuclides. Now, as we're looking to test these theories we have to describe all the nuclei, exotic nuclei, like lithium-11, with its very large neutron-to-proton ratio, are good testing grounds for these theories. So reason number 1 to study lithium-11 is because its high neutron-to-proton ratio makes it a good candidate for tests. One of the models that we use to describe a huge swath of nuclei on the chart is called the shell model. Now, you can draw an analogy here to the atomic shell model. Both of these models place particles in discrete orbitals. In the atomic shell model, you place electrons in these orbitals. And in the nuclear shell model, you fill up these orbitals that are shown here in red with neutrons and with protons. Now, the numbers that are here encircled indicate the number of particles it takes to fill the shells up to that level. And you'll notice that they're not marked in between every orbital here. The numbers right here are in between the large gaps between 2 different shells. So, and these numbers on the atomic shell model correspond to noble gases. And in the nuclear shell model, they're what we call magic numbers. Now, nuclei that have a magic number of protons or a magic number of neutrons are observed to be more stable than their neighbors. Because if you want to take a neutron from this level right here and excite it up to the next level, that takes a lot of energy. What we have observed in the nuclear shell model, though, is that these magic numbers are not constant throughout the whole chart. This plot right here shows the neutron single particle orbitals as a function of proton number for all the nuclei that have 7 neutrons. So this right here with Z equals 7 and N equals 7 is nitrogen 14. Now the gray level right here corresponds to this level right here, right below the magic number 8. And the 2 above here, the blue and the red, correspond to the 2 levels above it. Now at nitrogen 14, this gap is very large. But as you remove protons and continue removing them, the gap gets smaller until you reach beryllium-11, in which the two levels invert. Now, when you have a situation like this, when atoms from either side of a magic number or a large shell gap cross each other, we call it an island of inversion. Now, if you hear someone refer to the island of inversion, they're talking about this island of inversion at n equals 20. It's centered around magnesium-32. All of our nuclei, so lithium-11, lithium-10, and beryllium-12, are located in the lightest island of inversion down here around n equals 8. So reason number 2 to study lithium-11 is that it exists in a part of the chart of nuclides that displays interesting behavior in the shell model. The third reason to study lithium-11 is because it's what we call a halo nucleus, and this is probably what lithium-11 is most famous for. In 1985, Tanihata and collaborators measured the RMS matter radii of many light isotopes, and their results are shown here as a function of mass on the x-axis and the RMS matter radius on the y. The open circles here are the lithium isotopes. So you can see that lithium 6, 7, 8, and 9 all have approximately the same matter radius. Then you jump to lithium 10, and it's suddenly at 3.25 Fermi. This was the first indication of what we now know as the halo structure of lithium-11. And that is that we know that lithium-11 does not exist as a jumble of protons and neutrons all very closely together, but it actually exists as a lithium-9 core and 2 neutrons that exist at an extended radius, called a 2-neutron halo system. You can also have other halo systems. You can have a 1-neutron halo, like beryllium-11. You can even have a proton halo, like boron-8. Lithium-11, as a 2-neutron halo, is also what we call a Borromean system. Now, a Borromean system is a system that consists of 3 bodies, all of which, when you put them all together, are bound. But then when you remove any of the 3 bodies, it comes unbound. So in this case, if you remove one of the neutrons, you're left with lithium-10, which is unbound. And if you remove the core, you're left with a dineutron, which is also unbound. Borromean systems allow us to make a great simplification. Because of the spatial extent of these 2 neutrons, we don't have to model this as 11 nucleons all interacting with each other. We can model this instead as a core and 2 neutrons. As a simple, instead of an 11-body system, we can model it as a 3-body system. And once we make that simplification, if we model it as an inert core, we can compare this to data. And then we can add little details in. What if we include the first excited state of lithium-9? What if this core is deformed? How does that change our results? And we can investigate which of these properties and which of these features of the model will help us best predict lithium-11. Now, you want to look at 3-body models because as we continue to expand up in mass region of the chart of nuclides, as we explore more area in that, we expect to see more 3-body systems like this. Now, one of the things that we can measure in these 3-body systems are the energy levels of the systems. We can measure the energy as well as the spin amperity of these states. I'm going to focus here today on the measurements of excited states in lithium-11. All the excited states in lithium-11 are unbound, so they don't exist for long and they decay by emitting 2 neutrons. Lithium-11 in this excited state has been populated with a lot of different reactions. It's been populated with pion absorption, with proton scattering, and with double charge exchange. And our basic idea of this nucleus is shown here on the right. The ground state is a 3½ state, and it's the only bound state. These 2 other excited states, as I said, are unbound to 2-neutron decay. Almost every study of the unbound states of lithium-11 shows a state around 1 MeV. There are some that also show a state a little bit higher, around 2.4 MeV. So, measuring these states, the energies of these states, is the first thing that we're trying to measure in this experiment. The second thing that we're trying to measure is the decay mode. When those 2 neutrons are emitted, how are they emitted? Are they emitted sequentially, throwing one off at a time, in which case you're going through some intermediate state, lithium-10? Or are they emitted simultaneously, And if they're emitted simultaneously, how are they emitted? Are they emitted in a correlated fashion, what we would call a dineutron model? Or are they emitted in a three-body phase space kind of way, where there are absolutely no interactions between the three particles? This is the second goal of our experiment, to determine the decay mode of the unbound excited states in lithium-11. Now, to do that, we're going to populate lithium-11 with a 2-proton knockout from a boron-13 beam. This production mechanism has never been done before. We will create unbound lithium-11, which will immediately decay. It will decay into lithium-9 and 2 neutrons, and we'll measure lithium-9 and those neutrons, and then we'll use the invariant mass method to reconstruct the energy of that state. We will also look at the fragment neutron-neutron correlations as an indication of the decay mode. We also populated and studied unbound states in lithium-10 and beryllium-12, so I'd like to take a minute just to tell you how we populated those. We populated lithium-10 with the nucleus 1 to the left of boron-13, boron-12, with a 2-proton knockout again, and we populated beryllium-12 with a 1-proton knockout. None of these production mechanisms have been done before. We ran our experiment here at the NSCL in August of 2012. The coupled cyclotron facility produced a primary beam, oxygen-18, which impinged upon a beryllium production target right here. The fragmentation products from this were filtered through the A1900 fragment separator. And at the end of the line, a secondary beam of boron-13 was produced and sent to our vault. The boron beam arrived here in the lower right-hand corner of our experimental area. It hit another beryllium target in this green target chamber, and using 2-proton knockout, created lithium-11, which immediately decays. So those 2 neutrons flew straight into Mona and Lisa, right over here, while the charged fragments were bent by the sweeper magnet into our suite of charged particle detectors. Those detectors included 2 cathode readout drift counters, shown here. Those were used to measure the position of the particle. The ion chamber, shown here as the large box, measured the energy loss of those fragments. The blue square right here was a thin plastic scintillator that we used for timing, as well as a secondary energy loss measurement. And finally, the fragments came to a stop in our cesium iodide array, which also measured the total energy of them. Now the neutrons flew straight into Mona and Lisa. Mona and Lisa are 2 arrays of 144 plastic scintillator bars that are each 2 meters long, 10 centimeters deep, and 10 centimeters tall. When a neutron interacts in the detector, the detector emits light. That light is then bounced down the bar until it interacts on, the light is bounced down in both directions until it hits a photomultiplier tube that's at the end. Now, based on the time difference between the light's arrival at either end, we can calculate where in the bar this interaction occurred, as well as what time it occurred at. So once we have all this information, we have information of the neutrons and also the fragments. We're going to use that information to reconstruct what we call the decay energy. So every unbound nucleus will decay to a fragment in a neutron system. We'll go from this state to that state. What we measure is not necessarily the absolute excitation energy of this unbound state. We measure the energy difference between the initial state and the final state, the energy that is released in that decay. Now here it's drawn from a ground state to a ground state, but you could also have an excited state to a ground state decay, an excited state to an excited state. Any combination, we're just measuring the energy difference. We measure the energy difference using the invariant mass method. We take the 4 vectors of both the fragment and the neutrons and reconstruct this decay energy. Basically, all we're doing is conserving energy and momentum here. So, lithium-11, I showed you the level scheme right here earlier. This is the same one. But now I also want to show you the level schemes of lithium-10 and lithium-9 in relation to them. Both of these unbound states in lithium-11 will decay to the ground state of lithium-12. I'm sorry, lithium-9. And in terms of decay mode, there are some intermediate states in lithium-10, so a sequential decay is possible, but a direct decay is also possible. So our decay energy spectrum, in this case, looks like this. The decay energy is on the x-axis, is a MeV, and you can see a peak right here, just below 1 MeV decay energy. So if we do just a quick comparison with this level scheme, we can see that this is consistent with all the measurements of this state right here. The next thing we want to look at is the correlations between the neutrons and the fragment. We're going to do this using what we call Jacobi coordinates. Now, if you have a two-body decay, you can define it with two position vectors in the lab frame, because there are two particles. If you go to the center of mass frame, then, you can define the entire system with just one relative vector. Now, if you have a three-body decay, this is a little, you can do the same kind of thing. You have three position vectors, and when you boost to the center of mass frame, now you just need two relative vectors to define the system. Now, you can define this system with these two relative vectors in lots of different ways, but for the Jacobi coordinates, we're going to define them like this, in what we call the T system and the Y system. So in the T system, you have one vector going between the two neutrons, and then the second vector going from the core to the center of mass of that first two-body system. In the Y system, we're going to do a very similar construction, except that first two-body system is no longer the two neutrons, it's the core and the neutron. We're going to look at two different kinds of variables from each of these systems. We're going to look at an energy ratio first. So what we'll look at is the decay energy of this two-body system over the decay energy of the system as a whole. Basically what we're doing is trying to figure out how the energy is distributed among these three particles. For the Y system, we'll look at the same kind of energy ratio, except this time the two-body system is fragment and neutron. The second set of coordinates that we'll look at is an angle. We'll look actually at the angle between the momentum vectors that are defined, the two momentum vectors of these systems. So just to orient you a bit, these top two plots will go from 0 to 1, and these bottom two plots will actually look not at the angle itself, but at the cosine of that angle. So it'll go from -1 to 1. These are 4 different decay models that we're going to use in our simulation. These are just examples decays. These have no resolutions, acceptances. These are what I would call ideal Jacobi plots. And what I want to point out here is that they're different. The black line here is a phase space decay. The red line here is a dineutron decay. And the blue and the green are two kinds of sequential decays. In the blue decay, the energy is split evenly between the two neutrons. And in the green, it's split unevenly. So these 4 spectra can be used to discriminate between these 4 different decay modes. Our data in these plots looks like this. And I've left these ideal plots here in the corners for you to make a quick comparison. Qualitatively, I would say that the feature that I would draw your attention to is a enhancement in the cosine theta of the Y system down here near -1. If you compare over here, that looks like it could be a dineutron decay, signal of a dineutron. But these 4 idealized plots don't have any resolutions or acceptances, and the energy they're modeling may not be the same energy of lithium-11. So if we want to do anything more quantitative than this, we need to use a simulation. We used an in-house Monte Carlo simulation, and in the simulation we included the beam profile, the reaction that created lithium-11, the decay of lithium-11, detector resolutions, detector behavior, and as well as acceptances. We also use the simulation to apply what we call causality cuts. Now, if you have 2 neutrons flying at Mona Lisa, and then you get 2 interactions in Mona Lisa, you expect that, oh look, both neutrons interact in the detector. What happens a lot of the time is that one neutron will interact in a detector, scatter to another one, and interact again. We have neutron scattering or crosstalk between our detectors. We want to remove this, and these causality cuts are designed to do that. They are designed to reduce the amount of one neutron scattering in our data, and enhance the signal from a real detection of two neutrons. When we looked at the two neutron decay, we looked at 4 different potential decay paths, ways that lithium-11 could decay. We looked at 2 sequential paths, one through the ground state of lithium-10, and one through a well-established excited state. We also considered 2 direct decays. The dineutron 1 in orange shows the correlated emission of 2 neutrons, and the phase-space decay shows absolutely no correlation between any of the particles. Because when we detected, when we made our measurements, we detected lithium-9 and a neutron, we also need to account for the contribution of populating lithium-10 directly and then that decay. So we also included 5 what I would call 1 neutron decay paths. Now when we ran the simulation, we chose 1 2 neutron decay mode and then included all 5 of these as well. The best results, best fits from all 4 of these decay modes are shown here in comparison to the decay energy. Now, you can't really tell much. You can't use this spectrum to distinguish between these 4 decay modes. But they can all reproduce the data, which is good. We look then at the Jacobi plots, and here we see that unlike the ideal plots, the distinctions aren't as sharp. But you look at all 4, the orange line, the dineutron decay, is the model that best reproduces all of the Jacobi plots. Now I want to point out here that when we fit our simulation to the data, we didn't fit these plots. We fit all our decay energy plots, and these were just the results from the simulations. So this shows us that the decay of the neutrons from this excited state is by the emission of 2 correlated neutrons. I then want to go back to the decay energy and show you this dineutron decay model broken down by all its components. So you can see that the largest contribution to this decay energy, which is good because this spectrum has those causality cuts applied to it. So all of the 1 neutron components shown here in red, green, magenta, and gray are all very small. Our final result for the measurement of this excited state was we measured an excited state at 1210 plus or minus 80 keV in lithium-11. We can compare this result then to other measurements of this state in lithium-11. Here I show measurements of unbound excited states in lithium-11, and our results should go right here. So we are in agreement with most of the previous measurements of lithium-11. The second nucleus that I studied was lithium-10. And you study lithium-10 because lithium-10 is a subsystem of lithium-11. If you want to describe lithium-11 well, you need to know how the core and the neutrons interact with each other. And that can be described with the assistance of understanding the lithium-10 system. So once again, this is going to be a general review of what we know about lithium-10. We know that this ground state right here is of negative parity, and it decays by the emission of an L equals 0 neutron. This means that the decay is a very broad decay. It's very wide. There are suggestions that there's a low-lying positive parity state in the system, but there's also been a question of, do we really see this low-lying state, or are we confusing this with the ground state that is very broad? Most measurements of lithium-10 see an excited state around 500 keV decay energy. They see that it's positive parity, and it decays by the emission of an L equals 1 neutron. There's also some hints that there could be a state at higher energies. We think we can help out here with this one. We populated lithium-10 by using a 2-proton knockout from boron 12. The results of this mean that we expect to principally populate positive parity states. So if you're trying to distinguish a low-lying positive parity state from a broad negative parity state, if the state exists right here, we should see it without any interference, without any overshadowing by this broad ground state. our decay energy spectrum looks like this. There's a peak around 500 keV, so we're consistent with previous measurements. First thing we tried was to fit this decay energy spectrum with a single peak. And we couldn't. We could not make the line shape wide enough to fit the entire spectrum. Residual is shown down here, and you'll see that we're under-predicting the events on the lower energy scale, which is what you would expect if there is a lower lying positive parity state. We're also under-predicting some events on this shoulder right here. And if we want to be able to fit both this low energy and this higher energy, we're actually going to need two more line shapes. Our best fit with three line shapes was a state at 110 keV, another at 500, and one third one at 1100 keV. These would all be positive parity states that decayed by emitting an L equals 1 neutron. We can compare this as well to previous measurements. And this shows all previous measurements of positive parity states in lithium-10. Our measurements fit on top right here. So the green box is fully consistent with other measurements, and the blue box is close to the previous measurements of a state of a 1+ state in that area. This result was not the primary focus of our experiment, but this suggests that a devoted experiment to this would be worthwhile. The third isotope I measured was beryllium-12. We didn't set out to measure this, but it was also populated in our reaction. We populated beryllium-12 with a 1-proton knockout from boron-13. The decay energy spectrum showed a peak around 1.2 MeV, and when we fit it, our best fit was 1243 keV and a width of 634. Now, if we take this and we extrapolate it back from the ground state of beryllium-11, which we decay to, we get a state right here, around slightly above 4,400 keV. But here's where things start to get complicated. There's also a low-lying excited state right here, 1/2 minus. We could be decaying to that state, and we wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So if we were decaying to that state, this excitation energy is actually going to be a bit higher, around 4.8 MeV instead of 4.4. Also, any state at this energy could decay by emitting 2 neutrons, again, to the ground state of beryllium-10. So it seems that we should look at the 3-body decay energy spectrum in coincidence with beryllium-10. Once we apply the causality cuts to that spectrum, we get this, with absolutely no structure. We take this as an indication that any decay, any branching ratio to this 2-neutron decay channel is small. Going back to this 1-neutron decay, I talked earlier, we established states of, well, if it decays to the ground state, it will be here, but if it decays to the excited state, it will be here. There's also the possibility that it decays to both at the same time. Now, if you want to include this possibility, you could put another line shape of similar shape in here, and you would put it at a smaller decay energy, right here, or a red line shape down here. And the effect of this would be to push the center of this blue line shape up. Okay? So this level right here would actually get a bit higher. Now you can do the same kind of argument for the higher lying potential state, and the effect of including a second decay will actually bring that state down. So our result is that we see some excitation energy somewhere between 4,400 and 4.4 and 4.8 MeV. We're also in a position to say something about the spin imparity of this state. We required an L equals 1 decay for this to fit this line shape. An L equals 0 and an L equals 2 did not fit the data. So based on that and the spins of the final states, we can say that the spin of this unbound state is 0 or 1 or 2. We can get a similar restriction from the population mechanism. The 1-proton knockout from boron-13 and its ground state of 3/2 minus can populate any of these spins except for a 0 minus state. We also included as an input this very small branching ratio to the 2-neutron decay. We compared this to branching ratio calculations that were done by Garrido and collaborators. And in their calculations, they did branching ratios for unbound states in beryllium-12. Every positive purity state they calculated had a significant branching ratio to the 2-neutron decay channel, approximately a third. But the negative parity state had a branching ratio of less than 10%. So based on this, we would say it is probable you could explain the small 2-neutron decay branching ratio with a negative parity state. So our assignment of probable spin imparity is 1 minus or 2 minus for this state. So in summary, we've measured 3 different radioactive isotopes. We've measured lithium-11 with an excited state energy of 1210 keV that decays by emitting 2 correlated neutrons. Then in lithium-10, we populated 3 positive parity states. And in beryllium-12, we populated an excited state between 4400 and 4800 keV with a probable spin imparity of 1 minus or 2 minus. None of the work that I've presented here would have been possible without the support and collaboration of the local MONA group, as well as the nationwide MONA collaboration. And I also want to thank my committee for advising me this past 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. Questions?
On slide 24, you had those decay curves for the different L values. And the one for L equal 1 looked very wiggly, and I was wondering if this is not enough statistics in Monte Carlo, or if this
24,
is
you said?
L value.
Okay, so yes.
This ragged thing there.
The red one right
Yes.
there? Ideally, yes, we should run more
Okay.
a higher simulation. That's been running this week. Run at higher
So those
statistics.
little gaps there, 1 MeV and 0.3
Are
is
statistical.
nothing. Okay, okay, thanks.
Vladimir?
When you discuss di-neutron emission, do the neutrons interact in your simulations?
So the way that we model our di-neutron is a sequential decay using Alexander Bolya's model related to the continuum shell model. So the neutrons interact with a S-wave scattering length of minus 18.7. That defines, I suppose, we use that to define the relative energy between the 2 neutrons. Does that answer your question?
So if I look at this plot and I compare it with the kit that related to lithium-10, which is on slide 29.
Mm-hmm.
Slide 29 kind of uses a variety of these to the data spectrum.
Yeah.
And naively, if I look at this spectrum here, your black line kind of sits under the data on the same level as 10. But here you're not getting additional pieces. Whereas for lithium-10, you propose a number of states that's supposed to be there. It's a little bit inconsistent.
So we chose 1 decay for simplicity right now. Certainly the underprediction right here, as well as the width of this decay, which is quite wide, wider than you would expect, do indicate that you could have a second decay chain. For this analysis, we, for simplicity, stopped at 1.
Scott?
I think the previous slide where you discussed the different models, yeah, here. Initially, I think maybe it's possible to discriminate the green maybe by eye.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have a more quantitative argument in terms of the chi-square of p-value of the different? Do we agree? Do you exclude?
I don't, but that's a very good idea. That would be a good idea to calculate these chi-squares for the. I agree. That would make this
So
much more quantitative conclusion.
Yeah. How do you conclude then that the data favor the dynamics?
Most of it is just by visual inspection of this plot right
Oh,
here.
okay.
It's the only one that has any kind of increase there.
Questions from the students? Yes.
On the decay schemes, you show, I'm not talking about a specific one, but usually, so you have the decay going to some certain state, you measure the decay energy. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you know, or you're certain about which state you're decaying to. I mean, why can't you be decaying to some higher excited state, and then it coming from a decay that's much higher in energy in the nucleus that's decaying?
So you're right. This is a problem that we have, and can really only be directly observed by also having gamma measurements in coincidence. But there were similar knockout reactions done in this region. I think to lithium-10 actually, or in beryllium maybe. They did a similar knockout reaction and gated on, must have been beryllium-11, because there's a 320 gamma ray in the excited state of beryllium. Well, let's see. So I think if I recall, they did a knockout to beryllium-11 and observed very little in coincidence. No, I'm sorry, it must have been beryllium-12. But they looked at the decays, and they saw very little knockout to higher lying excited states that would decay to. I think I'm remembering this study wrong. I think it's lithium-10. They did not. They did a knockout to lithium-10, and they gated on the expected gamma ray energy from decaying to that first excited state of lithium-9, and saw very little population of higher lying excited.
So, but in your experiment, I mean, you're using a new production mechanism, right? Do you expect the decay to be similar in the sense that it won't go to the same states?
Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, that's not the case, then I'd like to thank Jenna again.